So we want to go ahead and get started with adding some of the facial features. So your head should look basically like an egg head at this point. I mean, they've got the roundness of the back of the head here, cutting into the neck. I've got where the jaw's coming down here. And I haven't tried to really refine all that too much because it's going to vary based on the person, right? And I'm kind of using a somewhat generic person to get started here, but I will turn it into an actual person. But I like to start getting facial features on, and then sometimes you realize I need to add more for the chin or take some chin away and that sort of thing. One of the things that's hardest for people to remember is to not put the eyes high in the face. We still, I mean, they're high in the face, but they're not high in the head, so we still have that tendency to put the eyes too high, and they look like an alien head. So if you come in, a lot of people want to put the eyes way up here, but that's much too high, because then there's no room at the top for much of anything, right? So I turn this towards myself, and I try and find what I think is about that halfway point. And I can kind of confirm by measuring if I go from there to the chin and from there to the top of the head, that is about the halfway point. The eyes are a teeny bit higher than that, but that's about the halfway point, and that's about where your tear ducts are going to go. So then I take both of my thumbs, and it's kind of I need to get a helmet cam or a shoulder cam or something, so I don't have to just sculpt sideways into a camera like this. But anyway, I take my thumbs and I start kind of pushing in, and I push in where this top of the nose is, this bridge of the nose. That on most everyone it goes in at least some people it goes in a lot, but I just go ahead and start pushing in, and I use my thumbs and start pushing in where I think the eyes are going to go, just to get that idea. And as I do this, I can also start pulling some of this from the cheek back here forward to start forming where the nose is going to pull forward. I can start figuring out where that's going to be. Right? And just by doing those few things, it already starts to look more like a person, maybe a person with a stocking over their head. They're going to go rob the bank. You can't make out all the features yet, but you know they're under there, right? Some things to look at is the side view of a person. From this point of view, this usually forms like a little sideways triangle where the cheekbone comes up this way and the brow bone comes down this way, and the eye kind of sits back in there. And the corner of the eye kind of sits back here, okay? So I want to kind of establish that on both sides too. So you have to remember to take this corner of the eye socket and pull it back some, right? It's not right out here on the corner of the face here, it's back. So you want to pull that back, all right? So once I kind of established, and sometimes I need to, add more for the brow later. Sometimes it's not symmetrical. And while most faces are not completely symmetrical, they're fairly even. Right? One eye is usually a little bit higher than the other, or usually bigger than the other, or it's usually just more expressive than the other. So I know that my left eye is slightly higher than my right eye, so if I'm sculpting myself, I have to do that, or it doesn't look like me when it's done. Okay? So again, I just keep kind of slowly pulling some of this forward. That's going to represent where the nose is. It depends on how big the person's nose is. And eventually I'll pull forward for the mouth too. But right now I just want to look again at the eyes. Now, I talked about how you can fit one eye between the eyes, right? So I want to kind of figure out that spacing, and I want to look and decide, how big is this going to be that needs to be repeated here, and that should also fit before you get to the outside of the head. Then what I like to do is just take a fettling knife, and I push in where the tear duct is going to be, and I try and do it on both sides at the same time. The temptation is to sculpt one eye, but if you sculpt one eye, your eyes will never line up. It's very difficult to get them the same. If you ask me to come over and help make an eye, I'll make one eye and then I'll gouge it out and make you start again because it won't look like the way I do it. But I take the flat edge of the knife and I try and make sure that it's clean, and slide it across like this, push it in here, slide it across this way. So I'm beginning to do more of an indication of where that tear duct is on both sides of the eye. I push on the outside. You need to look at the person that you are sculpting and decide if the outer corner is higher or lower than the tear duct, okay? Because most eyes, a lot of eyes, this corner can be higher, but it could also be lower, and you have to decide that. The other thing to think about is the eyeball itself. The eyeball itself goes from up here underneath the brow bone to down here somewhere underneath the cheekbone, and it slides behind the skin. It slides behind the eyelids and behind those bones. I always think of the upper eyelid as like an overhead door, an overhead garage door, and it comes down and closes to protect your eye, and then it opens up and it retracts in, right, as your eye opens and closes. So what it does, though, is it slides along your eyeball. It conforms to it, right? So it needs to look like it rounds also. So I keep moving, pushing on each corner. I keep smoothing this with the spatula flat. Notice I'm not carving into it. I'm not carving into it like this. I'm laying that flat on the eyeball, okay, so I can round it. And I want to make it look like it continues. It's not a little bitty ball. It's not the size of an almond. It needs to look like it slides up and that ball continues past the part that you can see. You just only see a very small portion of your eyeball. So it needs to look like it continues. Once those look fairly even, and I know that mine are not exactly even because I'm side sculpting, once those look fairly even, I can do a little bit more to define the lids. So what I do is I just take a little bitty coil, I just make a little teeny tiny coil of clay, and I lay it above the eye, and then I push it down from above flat, and I conform it to the roundness of the eyeball. Okay, it needs to be rounded. And I lift it off the eyeball just a little bit. I just like to use the tip of my fingernail to push it up, and that creates a little bit of a shadow, kind of representing like your eyelash line. You can't really sculpt eyelashes very well, but you can kind of sculpt that edge. So then again, I take this spatula and I wipe along it. If you don't have the right length of fingernail, you can push up gently with that also. And that kind of represents that, again, like that eyelash line and that little bit of shadow that it casts onto the eyeball itself. So see how it begins to form the eyeball? I'll do a very small coil underneath. I do a smaller one because your lower lid doesn't move as far as your upper lid, right? It stays fairly stationary unless you're squinting really hard. So you just need a little bit to help define it. And on this one, I smooth the bottom in, and I just allow that to help it give the illusion of this eyeball being inside of there, but continuing past what I can see. Depending on how wet or dry the clay is, it will determine how easy it is to smooth it. Sometimes you have to let it dry a little bit and come back and do some more later. Sometimes you'll start to notice, like this eyebrow, there's no brow bone on the top of this sculpture right now. I didn't do enough. You're going to want to start scoring and slipping. This clay is really sticky, so I'm not going to worry about it. And I want to just do it fast for demonstration purposes. But you're going to need to make sure that you're scoring and slipping when you're adding things on so that these things don't come off when it gets fired in the kiln later. But see, I can add a little bit more of a brow bone. And this brow bone is smooth, but it rounds under and creates that shadow above the eye. Okay, so this is why it's important that you have multiple points of view from your photographs, because I know you can't all have a live model that will just sit with you and turn their head just a little bit and keep that same expression, all right? So do you see how that can work? And to start forming that, and then later on you can build out the nose a little bit more. People have a tendency to try and make the nose life-size, and these sculptures are not life-size, so you do not need to make a life-size nose, or it will be disproportionate to the rest of the face. So I've got that one eye. I'm going to go back on this side, and I'll let you guys get to work. I'm going to go back on this side and add that upper lid on this side and try and even them out. Okay? I'm going to come around and help you guys individually.